We're still looking at standard 8, modern times. And this one we're going to look at 8.5, the economy. And we're going to look from the 1990s to present time. And so what we're going to look at in this standards, we're going to look at the key political and economic issues of the last 25 years. That includes the dependence on foreign oil, trade agreements and globalization. That's like NAFTA and GATT. We're going to look at health and education reforms. We're going to increases in economic disparity and the recession. We're going to look at tax policy, the national surplus, debt and deficits, immigration, the presidential resignation, impeachment, and the elections of 2000 and 2008. So to start off, we're going to talk about globalization. Globalization is an important word to understand for our economy today. Globalization is the growing trend towards expansion and integration of worldwide trading networks. The United States is impacted by globalization as its place as the world's foremost economic power in the post-World War II world has been challenged by growing economies around the world, mainly like China. So globalization basically means that the whole world is connected economically. And you see this through our products being made overseas and then being sold over here. And then what's happening overseas affects us a great deal. The United States also is dependent on foreign oil. We saw this a lot after Katrina, whenever we couldn't get oil, and the United States, and really in our area of South Carolina, we struggled to be able to have gas, and that was primarily because we are still dependent on foreign oil, and so that's why our prices go up, and therefore the American economy is impacted by fluctuation in world oil prices. So you see, as oil prices have gone up, that's kind of coincided a little bit with the economy going down in the United States. The European Union is another big important event that's happened since the 1990s. The European Common Market developed into the European Union, and that provides political cooperation as well as promoting democracy, trade, and the development of European economies. You see all the countries in blue down there, those are all the countries that are part of the European Common Market. And so together they make a pretty big economy that's about equal to the United States. Seems like there's always questions about NAFTA and GATT on the EOC and on our test. Both of these agreements attempt to lower the tariffs. And so what that's doing is globalization, meaning that we can trade with other countries more easily. NAFTA was the first, and what NAFTA did was it attempted to increase trade by eliminating trade barriers between the United States, Canada, and Mexico. One of the problems of that is that American manufacturers have gone overseas because it doesn't cost as much to ship goods to the United States because there are low tariffs, and so it's much better to pay someone lower wages over there than higher wages over here. So companies make a lot more money doing that. In 1994, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade also lowered tariffs around the world. So that's been another effect, is that U.S. manufacturers have gone overseas. And that's kind of what I was just alluding to. As a result of this globalization, United States industries are experiencing greater competition and a growing unfavorable balance of trade, meaning more things are being made outside of the United States than in the United States. There's also been the outsourcing of jobs of foreign markets. If you ever try to call customer support for anything technological related, it seems like you talk to someone in India because it's cheaper to pay someone in India than someone over here. And that's resulted in a lot of unemployment for some American workers. That's really affected the Rock Hill area. If you look at these two pictures, these are both former textile mills that were downtown Rock Hill. There's been a tremendous growth in the use of computers, and I don't have to tell you that. Internet, eBay, email, pagers in the 90s, computer games, cell phones, and that's really brought a lot of change to society, privacy laws, and communication networks in the United States and around the world. And of course, we all know that after we just talked about the NSA and the the worry about the government spying on us. The internet and satellite communications have promoted the outsourcing of some service jobs to places such as India. I even heard a story about how a drive-through restaurant relocated or outsourced to India. So basically, when you go to a drive-through restaurant, you're talking to a person in India rather than a person in the United States. There has been an issue of privacy, and that's whether the government can see our texts, our emails, and listen to our phone calls. And that's led to some problems. Of course, part of that is, should they be able to, if it's going to mean that they prevent something major from happening? And so that's a question that we have to ask ourselves. Mechanization and globalization are causing a lot a loss of manufacturing jobs in the United States and a combined shift to jobs in the service industry. So there are not a lot of factory jobs in the United States anymore. And you look at this assembly line in this one picture, the car is basically being made by robots. And the other picture is more of a joke, but that's kind of the way it's going towards using more and more mechanization to make things rather than actual people, which leads to a loss of jobs in the United States. Add to this, add to this is a competition for jobs is the influx of immigrants, which again leads to more and more competition for jobs because you have people migrating to the United States, mostly Hispanic, who are willing to work lower wage jobs, and that's causing there to be less lower wage jobs available. This has led to a huge controversy over immigration policies, still in the news today, talking about illegal immigration. It's impacted politics at the same time that trade policy has created political controversy about jobs. So immigration is not an issue that's going to go away anytime soon. One thing that's happened that's really affected our area is the move from Rust Belt to Sun Belt states. A lot of companies have moved from the north to the south, and part of the reason for that is that unions aren't as powerful in the south. So that's really hurt labor unions because they've experienced a decline in membership as workers face competition from overseas, new immigrants. There's been further mechanization in the manufacturing process and an increasingly hostile political climate. And like I said, industries have moved from the north to the south because the states in the south are mostly right-to-work states. So unions have very little power in the south. I mean, you really can't organize unions in the south and them have much power. And that's why you see big companies like, for instance, Boeing Airlines just moved to Charleston, and that was partly the reason for it. Let's talk about education. Globalization has raised some concerns about how well the American education system is preparing the nation's children to compete in the global market force. You see these ratings all the time, how children in the United States are not learning nearly as well as children around the world. As a result, there's been some legislation passed. The most important of those was No Child Left Behind. That was passed during George W. Bush's administration. And what this federal law mandated, that states have to test students to see if they meet increasingly difficult goals to demonstrate academic proficiency. I believe that all students were supposed to be reading at grade level by 2014, and then I'm pretty sure that didn't happen. Some demographic changes. There have been economic changes that have led to both mothers and fathers having to work outside the home to provide for their families. And as that's happened, that's changed the economy. I mean, think about it. If both mothers and fathers are working outside the home, then they're probably going out to fast food restaurants more often. So that's led to an increase in the fast food industry. And also you're going to have an increase in daycare, with both parents having to work, having to go to daycare. There have been medical advances that have prolonged productivity in life for many Americans. If you look at the age in the United States, the average age has gone up increasingly. That's led to the increasing cost of healthcare as people are living much longer and needing much more advanced medical care, and increasing cost of healthcare. As workers have lost jobs in manufacturing, as companies drop benefits to maintain competitiveness, many Americans are losing their health insurance. Lack of basic healthcare increases the burden on hospital emergency rooms, and the cost of healthcare continues to rise. You see that presidents have tried to fix this problem. Clinton tried to fix it with the health care reform, and then of course the Obamacare was passed, which is the Affordable Care Act. Of course, this is very, very controversial. The aging population in the United States has also led to controversy surrounding Social Security. Basically, there are more people on Social Security than they ever planned for. And so if something isn't done, then Social Security is supposedly going to go bankrupt at some point. Both lead to a higher government spending and higher national debt. In the early 1980s, increased government spending for military defense led to higher deficits and a growing national debt. During Clinton's presidency, the government balanced the budget and tried to lower the national debt. That's one reason why Clinton's still very popular, because he worked together with the Republicans in the House and the Senate to set a balanced budget. I think it was like one of the only times in recent history that there's been a balanced budget. So let's talk about the Clinton years a little bit. And when Clinton was president, he tried to reform welfare, and that would help cut government spending. He also tried to pass health care reform, although it didn't pass because Republicans in Congress blocked it. There were continued investigations into the Clintons' lives, and he was impeached by the Republican House of Representatives. He didn't actually resign like President Nixon did, and the Senate did not convict him. But there were a lot of scandals during his presidency, and he was investigated quite a bit. A lot of that had to do with some partisan issues with the Republicans. During the Clinton administration, there was a deficit reduction plan that included tax increase, spending cuts, and the establishment of an earned income tax credit. When Clinton left office, there was a balanced budget and the national debt was shrinking. However, the gap between the rich and the poor was increasing, and that's primarily, like I was saying, because the manufacturing jobs have been going overseas. So what's happening is a lot of the jobs that are left are more low-paying jobs, and so it leads to a bigger gap between the rich and the poor. There's not a lot of those middle-class jobs anymore, working in factories. The Federal Reserve did keep inflation in check and stimulate the economy. The Clinton years are thought of very positively in terms of the economy. So that leads us to the election of 2000. And in the election of 2000, you had George W. Bush versus Al Gore. And the outcome of the election remained undecided for several weeks after Election Day as Democrats and Republicans contested the counting of ballots in Florida. If you can see by the picture down there, the actual gap between George W. Bush and Al Gore was very low in Florida. So I think it was only like 2,000 votes or so that actually decided the election in Florida. Finally, the Supreme Court stopped the recount and George W. Bush won the election. So let's talk about the George W. Bush years. He took a little bit of a page from Ronald Reagan and did tax cuts for the wealthy that was designed to stimulate the economy. The problem was that further increases the economic disparity because, like I said before, the trickle-down economics don't necessarily work, and eventually led to budget deficits, and so the national debt starts climbing. Part of the reason the national debt climbed during George W. Bush's time period is because of September 11th. After that, the United States went to war in both Afghanistan and Iraq, and so it started spending a lot more on defense. It actually started spending more on defense than they ever had. At the end of the Bush years, the housing bubble burst, and the Bush administration turned to deficit spending to stop the decline. They initiated a stimulus package and a bailout for banks to forestall the deepening recession. The unemployment rate topped 10%. Tax revenues fell and deficits grew. That's when the government went into more and more debt. It's been known that the state of South Carolina calls it the Great Recession in their standards. This Great Recession saw the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression in the 1930s as people lost their jobs and their homes. And as you know, we're still in the midst. I think we're still in the midst of it. We may be coming out of it, but it's not gone as quickly as the politicians would have liked. In the election of 2008, there's worsening economic conditions, and that's going to lead to people wanting change. And so what happens after a conservative era like George W. Bush's is you usually have a liberal swing. And that's when Obama was elected, which he is the first African-American president, which is a big deal. The Obama administration passed a second stimulus package to try and jumpstart the economy. Conservative critics objected to deficit spending because it raised the national debt. However, Congress did not repeal the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy to bring in more revenue to help balance the budget. And so you still had like the tax cuts for the wealthy, and so they're not bringing in as much. So that's going to lead to a higher national debt. And really the stimulus didn't help as much as anyone would have hoped it would have. And so where we're at right now, economists say the Great Recession has ended. I don't know if that's necessarily true. There's a lack of confidence in the economy because of political wrangling and the worsening debt crisis in Europe, and that continues to dampen consumer spending. We're worried about the government shutting down, then that's not going to cause people to want to go out and spend money. There's been high unemployment, even with the low interest rates. Government deficits and debt continue to grow along with the gap between the rich and the poor. And conservatives and liberals continue to seem unable to find a compromise solution, and the political extremes control the debate. That's like the debate between Obama, who's fairly liberal, with the Tea Partiers who are fairly conservative. And so it doesn't seem like there's a lot of middle ground right now. And so who knows what's going to happen? Well, that's where we sit right now. Thank you very much for watching. Please turn in your notes guide and take the video quiz. Thanks.